The Atlanta Braves beat the Toronto Blue Jays last night 8-4 without Marcell Ozuna, who was in Atlanta with a hip injury. What do we know, and what do the Braves do from here? Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Tuesday, April 15th. Your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on social media at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on X, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram as well. And you can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. In the third segment, we're going to talk about Grant Holmes and what he did differently last night, right? He had a different approach against Toronto than he had both against Philly and LA, and we saw the results last night. We're going to get that in the third segment. We're going to talk about the offense, what the offense has done in the last 7 days, some guys in particular, and then who is still not performing and why. But before we do all of that, we've got to get back to Marcell Ozuna. If you may remember, he left Sunday's game before his final at-bat. He was running a little gingerly to running the base paths, a little gingerly with what ended up being some sort of hip issue. I thought it was hamstring at the time, the way he was running, but it was his hip. And they ended up lifting him from that game. Stuart Fairchild took the final DH at-bat for Atlanta in the loss to Tampa Bay on Sunday. When the team flew to Toronto after the game, Marcell instead was flown to Atlanta to go have an MRI just to see what's going on. Exploratory MRI, right? I'm not going to say they weren't diagnosing an issue, but it wasn't like, hey, we think this is torn and we want to confirm it on the MRI. It was, he's sore, he's got some pain, it's impacting him. We want to see if there's anything there on the MRI. According to manager Brian Snitker before the game, quote, and there wasn't, as in there wasn't a serious injury there. So he'll be back and getting treatment every day. He'll take it as a day-to-day thing. So Marcell is not going to be available for the entire Toronto series. And that changes some things for the Braves here, right? You're in a situation where last night, for instance, Brian De La Cruz was your DH. So your outfield, and not where you thought the outfield would be in mid-April. Michael Harris was in center. Stuart Fairchild was in right. Eli White was in left. Again, not really the outfield configuration you thought you would be rolling out there in mid-April on a World Series contending team. Now, mixed results from that group. Fairchild goes 0 for 4 with a strikeout. Eli White goes 1 for 3. He does also draw a walk. He strikes out once. He scores 2 runs in Atlanta's 8-4 victory. The De La Cruz, by the way, from the DH spot, 0 for 4. And the reason you went with Brian De La Cruz as your DH was because there was a lefty on the mound. So that was adjustment number 1 to having a lefty on the mound. And by the way, the Braves as a whole have been one of the best teams in baseball against lefty starters for a while now. There's a note from the comms team for Atlanta. Since 2018, the Braves have been 165 and 106 against lefty starters. It's a 609 winning percentage. It is the 3rd best record in all of baseball against lefty starters. The Astros are at 630. The Dodgers are at 632. And at least with the Astros, you got to take anything that involves 2018 with a little bit of a grain of salt because of the whole trash can thing. We saw other adjustments that Atlanta made in this game because of the lefty starter as well. Ozzy Albies was leading off. In his career, he has a 333, this is going into last night, 333 batting average, 359 on base, 558 slugging against left-handed pitching. All active players in MLB with at least 500 plate appearances, Ozzy's .333 average off of lefties is number 1. So yeah, you lead off Ozzy Albies. Yeah, you put Brian De La Cruz in there. That makes perfect sense. And the De La Cruz part didn't work out. Ozzy goes 1 for 4 with an RBI and a run scored. So there you go. The question for me is going to be, what changes or what do you do differently in games 2 or 3 when you have a righty on the mound? I think a lot of us would like to see Drake Baldwin be your DH. And it's funny, we mentioned that on the postcast last night. Me and Jake Mastriani did. And not everybody is okay with the concept of Drake Baldwin because they look at Drake Baldwin's statistics and they say, hey, Drake Baldwin sucks. Like, why are you trying to force him in the lineup when he's batting 167 and it's with a .233 slug? And he's got one of the biggest underperformances of his batted ball metrics of any hitter in baseball. He should be batting .238 with a .504 slug. And I'm at the point now where if you don't use him here, like if this is the situation to use him, if you don't use Drake Baldwin as your DH here, when are you going to use him? There's almost, and I saw last night on the broadcast, Baldwin had a notebook. He may have been charting, I'm not sure, but Baldwin had a notebook in the dugout, and he was sitting with Chris Sale and Spencer Strider. And the three of them were watching the game together, and Baldwin's taking notes. And again, I'm assuming he's charting. A lot of catchers chart during games. That's just the thing you probably should do, keeping track of the game and what's going on and hitter tendencies and all that stuff. But I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that conversation. And like those kind of interactions are great. Those are super useful. But I do feel like if you're not going to start him more than once a week, I think he started one game since Murphy's been back. If you're not going to start him more than once a week, and you're not going to use him as the designated hitter while Marcell Ozuna is out, send him to Gwinnett. Put him back in Gwinnett. Call up somebody. At this point, I don't care who it is. Call up James McCann. Put him in the majors. Call up Jason DeLay to be a backup catcher. Something like that. Because you've got to use him. Give him some sort of playing time. And I think Jake and I speculated a little bit about this off air last night after the postcast. If you're scared about using your other catcher as your DH because of injury concerns, which Murphy just came back from injury, I get that. He was hit by a pitch, nothing he could control. And then he got hit again last night, and you saw them put the protective sleeve on his arm after taking a fastball off the elbow. If you're not going to use Drake Baldwin in that situation to put him in as a backup, and you're not going to use him as a DH, send him down. Or bring up a third catcher, right? Stick a third catcher on the roster for a couple days so that you have the reassurances that if an injury happens, you'll still have a catcher. And to clarify how this works, by the way, if the DH has to move out of the DH spot into another spot in the lineup, as I understand it, and I'm probably going to be wrong on this because I'm saying this confidently. As I understand it, you then, in essence, lose your DH spot. And you have to either, the pitcher has to hit or you have to pinch hit for whoever it is. I would love for the Braves to use Drake Baldwin, given that hit by pitch that Murphy had. It's possible maybe Baldwin starts behind the plate tonight and Murphy's your DH. Either way, I think you could take whichever guy's not hitting or not catching and use them as a DH for almost the entirety of the time that Marcell Ozuna is out. And to close the book on that, by the way, he's getting treatment every day. Marcell Ozuna is. If he's not responding well to treatment and he has to go on the injured list, you can do that retroactive up to 3 days. So I believe they would have, if they decide on Thursday they need to IL him, they can make it retroactive to Tuesday. So they've, and if they decide by Wednesday they want to do it, they can make it retroactive to, I think it's Monday after the game. I don't know if you can do it after the game or if it has to be the next day, but either way, they can do 3 days retroactive, right? So they've bought themselves a little bit of wiggle room. What I don't want to happen is like what the Braves did with Riley last year, where he missed 2 weeks of games but never went on the IL, and you just played shorthanded for 2 weeks. This is the way that you're having to mix and match your outfield, your corner outfield spots. This is not a roster that can play shorthanded for a week. So hopefully they're a little more aggressive about putting guys on the IL this year, and Marcell Ozuna is going to be our first test case for what they're going to do there. In just a minute, let's talk about the offense from last night, and specifically Mr. Austin Riley and what he did. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Chinook Seedery, the absolute best sunflower seeds on the market. One of the perfect blends of saltiness and sweetness. I crushed a bag of Parmesan and pepper last night while watching this game. But 8 flavors, Parmesan and pepper, obviously, cinnamon toast, dill pickle, Hatch chili, smokehouse barbecue, jalapeno ranch, lemon pepper, or just the old chestnut of original flavor, right? Just the old standard of original flavor. You don't need any of those fancy flavors. They got something for you. You can go to ChinookSeedery.com and get a sampler pack. The promo code, by the way, does work. Somebody asked me this. The promo code of Braves does work on the sampler pack. Gets you 10% off the sampler pack. But it's where you can try all 8 of them. And then, depending on what you like and what you don't like, you can either buy a variety pack. It's a case with some of everything. Or you can build your own pack, your own case with just the flavors you want. Again, Chinook Seedery, CHINOOK, ChinookSeedery.com, promo code BRAVES, gets you 10% off and free shipping on orders over $40. That's ChinookSeedery.com, promo code BRAVES. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby covering the 8-4 Atlanta Braves victory over the Toronto Blue Jays yesterday. And we finally saw the offense that we were expecting all year. Some of that may have been because there was a lefty on the mound. I mentioned that in the last segment, how good the Braves have been against lefties. But Sean Murphy gets the scoring started early with his 4th home run of the year in the first inning. He was batting cleanup in this one. And that home run gave him sole possession of first place in homer production for the Atlanta Braves until Austin Riley had his say. Austin Riley hits a home run in the top of the 3rd. 2-run shot, scores Eli White. I believe that one came off of an elevated fastball, still in the zone, but an elevated fastball. And then Riley follows that up in the 5th with a 3-run shot off of an inside slider, inner third of the plate, just below the belt. And he turns on it and gets it out to left center. Scores 2. So Riley finishes this game 2 for 4, 2 runs, 5 RBI. As, again, Atlanta cruises 8-4. A little bit of issues later in the game, right? Some inherited runners score. Some bequeathed runners from Grant Holmes to Aaron Bummer score. And then another one comes up in the 9th to the point where Raisel Iglesias has to start throwing, which was sucked. I hated that Iggy had to get up. You have to hope he didn't get completely hot. But mentioning the Riley thing, I think it's important to point out here that for as much as the offense was struggling early in the year, the last week or so has been pretty good for quite a few Atlanta Braves. Over the last 7 days, Austin Riley is batting .452. He's 14 for 31, 7 runs, 8 RBI. Of those 14 hits, 6 are for extra bases, 3 doubles, 3 homers. That's an 839 slugging. His OPS is 1.308. He's one of 4 different Braves with an OPS over 1,000 in the last 7 days. The big loss here, Marcell Ozuna was second on the team in the last week. 375 average. 2 home runs. Obviously, again, he's out the rest of the Blue Jays series at least, if not possibly more. We will find out a little bit later in the week. Ozzy Albies, who led off against the lefty last night, 321 in the last 7 days. Sean Murphy, 273. And then honestly, and it's incredibly small sample sizes with at least one of these guys, but both shortstops have been hitting in the last week. Nick Allen's played in 5 games in that stretch. He's 5 of 14 with 3 runs scored and 2 stolen bases, which means a batting average of 357. Orlando Arcia is 3 for 11 with a double, an RBI, and a run scored. So 273 average, same as Sean Murphy, although Murphy has twice as many at-bats. A lot of guys are clicking right now. A lot of guys are just seeing the ball well, and they're hitting well, and it's a great change from what was going on the week before when everybody was awful. Now, unfortunately, that hot streak does not extend statistically to everybody. Michael Harris is 4 for 26 in the last week, so batting 154. He does have a home run. He has scored twice. He does have 5 RBI in that stretch. He's also stolen 2 bases. We're going to get the stolen bases in a second. Matt Olson is 4 for 27, batting 148. Now, I talked about this a little bit in the newsletter on Monday morning. He has also been crushing baseballs. Matt Olson had a ton of balls over 100 miles an hour over the weekend, including, I believe, one of the games, all 4 batted balls had an expected batting average of at least 630 or so, and he finished with 1 hit. So a little bit of, people are tired of hearing this, a little bit of bad batted ball luck for Matt Olson. I'm not worried about Ole simply because he has been, again, crushing baseballs. He's making very high quality contact, and you don't want him to change a thing because over time you will get an above average amount of hits from hitting the ball hard, and he's been doing that. He did have quite a few on the ground on Saturday. He fixed that launch angle issue on Sunday, but again, crushing the ball, you're okay with that. I'm starting to think, and his overall stats aren't great. He's 1 for 5 in the last week, but I'm starting to think that Eli White may need some more playing time. He may need to be a legitimate member of that platoon rotation thing out in the outfield. Because, again, last night, he scores twice. He was 1 for 3 from the 9 hole, but scored twice, walked once, and in his short amount of playtime, I feel like he's been good. And he gives you speed on the base paths, which, by the way, Atlanta has stolen 8 bases in the last 7 days. The bigger thing to me, they haven't been caught once. So they're not running wild, but they're very efficient with their stolen base opportunities. And I think that's an avenue, or that's an aspect of the Braves, of the game, that the Braves have not been properly taken advantage of. Allen's 2 for 2. Ozzy Albies is 2 for 2. Brian De La Cruz has 1. I think I remember that being defensive indifference on Sunday, but either way, he has 1. Michael Harris has 2. Stuart Fairchild has 1. He went 0 for 11 over the last 7 days, but he still has a stolen base in that span. I don't necessarily think he is probably an actual member of the rotation, or that he should be. I'd rather have White over Fairchild if I'm starting somebody in the outfield, right? If Baldwin's the DH today, you have De La Cruz I'm fine with De La Cruz and White, or Kelnick and White, versus White and Fairchild, or De La Cruz and Fairchild, or Kelnick and Fairchild. I'd rather play Eli White than Stuart Fairchild. But either way, neither here nor there. So the offense has picked up, and you could see where you have the ability to get more production, right? If Matt Olson starts getting more neutral luck, if Michael Harris and Jared Kelnick, who Kelnick walked 5 times in that stretch, he only had 2 hits. It was 2 for 11, 3 runs, and no RBI, a double, but 5 walks in that stretch. Led the team in walks in the last 7 days. If some of these guys can start to make it happen, you can see where this offense can all of a sudden be an absolute force. And last night felt like those old Braves games where they just steamroll somebody, like in 2023, right? 3 home runs in the first couple innings, an 8-0 lead, and you end up cruising. Speaking of cruising, we saw Grant Holmes put up the longest start of his career, and it's because he made a change to his pitch mix that he wasn't, like a pitch that he was not throwing in the first couple games. I'll break that down for you next, right here on Braves Today. Final segment of Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby here, just wanting to pitching nerd on you for a second. Grant Holmes, 7 2/3 innings last night. 2 hits, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts. He had a perfect game into the 5th inning. He allowed a walk to open the 5th inning, and then he had a no-hitter into the 6th, and he allowed a solo shot the start of the 6th inning. Again, the 7 2/3 innings. It was only the second time as a starter that he's gone more than 5 innings in the majors. And when I dove into, like, after the postcast last night, and I sat down to figure out exactly what it was that made him so successful, I realized it was the cutter, right? He didn't get a ton of strikeouts, right? He allowed some hard hit balls. And my first thought was, when I dove into the numbers, was going to be, it's the slider. Because I remember after the Phillies series, so many of those guys had things to say about the slider. Trey Turner talked about it. Manager Rob Thompson talked about it. It was the cutter. Okay, so in the first 2 starts, what Grant Holmes did, fastball, curveball, was what he threw against lefties, fastball, slider against righties. 193 combined pitches in those first 2 games, and he threw exactly 3 cutters. That's it, just 3. Now, of those 3, he got a ground out on Jason Hayward. He got a swinging strike on Nick Castellanos, and Trey Turner took it for a ball. Last night, Grant Holmes threw 17 cutters in 94 pitches. And the idea here was it worked as a bridge pitch. And it was a bridge pitch against both lefties and righties, right? He threw 10 of them to lefties. He threw 7 of them to righties. And I went and dove into the sequences. Every single pitch after a cutter in the same at-bat either was a strike and resulted in an out, but 2 of them. And it's because the cutter, with the little bit of movement changes on it this year, almost perfectly bridges both the slider and the curveball, right? He used the cutter to set up Anthony Santander to ground out on a curveball in the first inning. He used the cutter to get Nathan Lukes to then fly out and swing over or swing under something in the 6th inning for a flyout, and in the 8th inning for a line out from Ernie Clement. He got a couple outs on the cutter itself. Vlad Guerrero flew out on it in the 7th inning. Andre Jimenez did in the 2nd. But he got 2 whiffs on the pitch immediately after a cutter, again, in the same at-bat, 2 called strikes, and 3 foul balls. Because what the cutter does with the changes that it has now, it bridges both of his breaking balls really well. So, just like everybody, Fastball up is part of what he does. But then he has his slider has more drop but less horizontal movement than the average righty slider. Okay? And then Holmes's curveball has more drop and less horizontal movement than the average righty curveball. And obviously it drops more than the slider, so there's your difference between the two. Is it does move horizontally. The curveball moves horizontally more than the slider does. Neither one of them move as much as average, which is fine. As long as, you just don't want to do what everybody else does. You can do less or more as long as you just do something different. So the cutter, with the new movement profile, it drops a little more than your average cutter, and it cuts a little less than your average cutter. And there's a great, if you go to StatCast and you look at the visual pitch plot, you can see a representation of this. But the cutter now is perfectly in the middle from a vertical perspective between the fastball and the slider. Okay? And then the cutter horizontally is exactly in the middle between the fastball and the curveball. And again, for some reason, and I don't know why, he wasn't throwing the cutter in the first two starts. Again, 193 pitches, he threw a total of 3 cutters. Last night, 17 cutters in 94 pitches. It just disguises really well with the fastball and the breaking balls out of the hand, because now you can't immediately, because for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, if you're a lefty, it's going to be fastball curveball. And if you're a righty, it's going to be fastball slider. That's not hard and fast. He does throw the curveball to righties. He does throw the slider some to lefties. But predominantly, that's how it works for Grant Holmes. And now with the cutter in the mix, as soon as you can read a little bit of spin and know that it's not a fastball, you can't pull the trigger on a curveball or a slider without possibly being wrong because there's a cutter in the mix. And you don't have to make guys completely whiff, and he didn't last night. Again, he did not have a ton of whiffs in this game. What is it? He had 9 whiffs, and his CSW, college strikes plus whiffs, was 27%, below average, below MLB average, which is like 31% usually. But it kept just enough guys off the barrel where, other than the solo shot, he didn't really run into a lot of trouble in this game. I thought the kick change that he added, that I broke down on the show with the visual aid, I thought the kick change was going to be the pitch that unlocked everything for Grant Holmes this year. Instead, it turns out it's the cutter. But he was rewarded with the second longest start of any Braves pitcher this year, behind only Spencer Schwellenbach's 8 innings in the home opener against the Marlins. And you were able to only use one bullpen arm in Aaron Bummer, and the one that was the freshest because he was just away from the team for the last series because he was on the bereavement list. Now, again, Raisel Iglesias started getting up. You have to hope he didn't get fully hot, or else you're not going to have him for the last 2 games of the series. They're probably not going to want to try to throw him 3 days if they can help it. So hopefully he didn't get fully hot last night. But you saved the entire rest of the bullpen. You gave them, for the most part, you gave them a day off because of how deep Grant Holmes was able to go. Gonna be another fantastic matchup tonight. It's of back-to-back Spencer days. This is Spencer Schwellenbach versus old friend Kevin Gausman. So reminder there, you're going to see former Braves pitcher Kevin Gausman and his splitter in this one. Also reminder on this, it is Jackie Robinson Day. So everybody's going to be wearing number 42 for Jackie Robinson Day. 7:07 p.m. Eastern is the broadcast. All of the normal places to find it, FanDuel Sports South and Southeast. And we'll be back tomorrow to break down the interesting news and notes from that one. If you're listening on audio, do us a favor. Leave us a 5-star review, Apple, Spotify, whatever Google uses nowadays for those things. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when we drop tomorrow's episode. We like to get these things out at noon every day. Sometimes we get bonus content out, whether it's media availabilities the team sends out, whether it's bonus episodes that I do for off days, things like that. We're going to try to make it happen. And then also, bravestoday.com. Free or paid subscriptions there get you 6 to 7 newsletters a week, deep dives, some different stuff from what you see sometimes in the podcast, more prospect-focused stuff from time to time. So go check that out as well. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.